Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I know that this year is winding down and we're about to have our final coming up very soon. I want to go over all of that in our next video, but I'm going to talk about something called evolution. It's a very controversial topic in science, and a lot of people butt heads when it comes to this. And I know that for those of you who are freshmen and haven't had biology, you'll be seeing a lot of this next year, and I want to go over some images that influenced my mind when I was young. And those images, a lot of them turned out to be based on some falsities and were designed to support theories, and somehow have kind of just ended up in the mainstream science world and are still in textbooks today. And so I'm going to go over things. I'm not telling you to shut down and not look into evolution. Just going to show you some things that shaped my mind as a young kid, and one of those was a set of drawings. There was a man named Ernst Haeckel, and he had a theory that a lot of evolutionary changes happened during embryonic development, and that we were all very similar. As you can see in the early stages, you have here a fish embryo, an amphibian, a reptile, a bird, and a human, and that they all looked very similar in those first stages, and the changes didn't start branching out and becoming more diversified until later on. And this isn't entirely a lie. There are some similarities early on, but these again are drawings from the 1800s, and the field of embryology has come a long way since then, and we actually have pictures instead of cartoons, and those pictures look a bit different. And here's a news article showing that, where you look at the early stages. At the very bottom of this article, they put real pictures, not drawings, but real pictures. And these real pictures are supposed to match what you see on the top row here, but they don't. And so this is where sort of a bias in scientific thinking can happen, is when you are only exposed to one thing. Like this here is what's before you in your textbooks and is what I saw in school. And reality is something you just need to investigate it for yourself. Drawings are great. They can help scientists in many ways, but this is one of those situations where they can sort of set us back because they get us believing something that is a stretch on the truth. So you have real images now. Make sure you always investigate beyond what is right before you before drawing your conclusions. Textbooks can sometimes put out pictures like this, not because they are all evil. It's just because there's no copyright. Of course, the guy is dead, and you can use his images, and it's cheap, and it's easy to do, and you can put them in textbooks. They're still in there today. But other stuff like the dino bird. This was a big deal when I was early on into teaching. Lots of teachers were putting out these images of the dino bird, and they are spectacular. It was proclaimed a new species by none other than the prestigious National Geographic Journal magazine, and they called this finding a crucial missing link, and it was representing the proof that birds were the last living descendants of the dinosaurs. But just a few weeks later, this Archaeoraptor was unveiled as a hoax, and it was wedged together with bits and pieces from at least two animals by canny Chinese farmers with a feel for what the paleontologists were looking for. And it now is what appears to be the dinosaur version of the Piltdown Man. And if you aren't familiar with the Piltdown Man, this is one of those archaeological finds that fooled scientists for decades. It was in the Natural History Museum, and it was alleged to be another missing link. And this missing link between ape and man that they were seeking for just happened to fit that narrative. However, it was more like a Hollywood prop where they had taken the jaw of an ape and filed the teeth down to look more human-like and just painted it a little darker to make it look ancient. And had the find been what it was claimed to be, it would have been quite impressive and definitely looked like a missing link, but it wasn't. And that was one of those things that let us know as a scientific community that we can be fooled, and it's important that we look at the evidence ourselves and do more research and find the proofs that we're looking for to support what we believe. if we are looking at certain things that haven't been tested properly, it's easy to draw false conclusions. And I think that things like this really helped shape a lot of people's minds while it was considered evidence. So just be cautious when looking at different things before you draw your conclusions. A lot of people don't understand that evolution goes beyond missing links because, again, it is just change over time. As simple as microbiologists look at bacteria, things that reproduce way faster than humans because they reproduce asexually, you see changes a little more rapidly, especially when mankind is involved and we not only alter their genes, but we destroy them with our antibiotics and things like that. They can have the survival of the fittest, where the strongest are now being replicated, and the survivors of the group of thousands, you're going to have a couple. And that, how bacteria, antibacterial things claim to kill 99.9%. Well, that 0.1% is enough to make a difference and change things and create what we call superbugs. And they're just really not really bugs, but really strong bacteria that are able to fight off the treatments we give them. And so you have people dying from things that were once treatable, like staph infections, MRSA, we call it. Lots of things that were once treatable now have given the medical field challenges, and it has to do with evolution. You're not seeing these bacteria turn into any other organism. They are better versions of themselves. They are stronger, or at least definitely more fit to survive the environments that have the medications. So that's a part of evolution that is very important to science today. And again, that is not saying that we come from monkeys, but just that organisms have a tendency to have the strongest or the most fit survive. So that is something that we cannot say doesn't happen. We know it happens, but there are other falsities, especially in terms of missing links like the coelacanth, things that I saw as a child, and there are lots of fossils of that, and they are said at one point to be having these limb structures that help them crawl on land and were a link between land animals and fish. And the coelacanth is still alive today. They have specimens that have been collected that were living and can be seen. They are quite large, these fish. They are very large and beautiful ancient fish that have been around for a while. And their fins do look like they would be something that would help them crawl on land. And when I was a kid, I saw pictures like this where the fish was learning to walk on land and eventually growing legs. And the images are supporting someone's belief. They're drawing the stuff out. It doesn't mean that we have found these links. It's just a really good way to demonstrate what they believe based on the evidence that they are seeing. And another thing, something else that's important when talking about the age of different things is fossils. Fossils can be created rather quickly. It depends. Sometimes they may take longer times to form, and there are examples of that. But we have fossils of things like an octopus, which octopus is only soft tissue, and the soft tissues of this octopus would be gone in a matter of days if it did not fossilize. And a rapid movement of land over top of this thing to sort of encapsulate it and preserve it had to have happened sort of like a landslide or tsunami. Who knows? But this thing was covered up rather quickly and was able to fossilize, and that's why we have things like this. It doesn't take millions of years to form fossils, and here's just a really good example of that. It could have been a major flood or something that caused that to happen, but this did happen. We do have that, and it's proof that fossils really don't take tens or hundreds of thousands of years in that ballpark. And that's sort of the collective consensus that I always had growing up, was that it took that long. But there are some times where that wasn't the case. Not to say that all fossils are young, but that is sometimes the case, that they can form rather quickly and show you details of the flesh of the organism, especially those who don't have bones. So before you use images like something like this to kind of draw a belief system. I'm not saying you can't or laughing at those who do. Just make sure you think about every single aspect of it and look at the evidence a little closer before drawing those conclusions. Because people, even like Ernst Haeckel, the man with the embryo drawings that are still used today, he claimed that spontaneous generation must be true. And if you don't know what spontaneous generation is, it's really just the belief that life itself can just come from thin air, like we have something die and all of a sudden there's maggots and flies and all of that. The belief that those maggots and flies just sort of came from the air is spontaneous generation, or that frogs come from the mud because people would see them after hibernation when there'd be rain and all that stuff coming in and snow would melt. Frogs would come out of the ground and people thought that they were just growing from the ground like potatoes. And that's just not true. And he believed this was in the 1800s. So it's not really that long ago, speaking scientifically, when people thought that this could be true. And he said that it's not because it had been proven in the laboratory, but because otherwise it would be necessary to believe in a creator. That was his theory. And you have Louis Pasteur coming into the science world, and he is very famous for pasteurization. When you have a food product that lasts longer than a couple weeks, it's due mostly to people like this, Louis Pasteur, who invented pasteurization. And it is one of those things that changed the food industry, because we can preserve things and we know how to keep them from rotting, because people thought that if you had, like I said, an open container of dead organisms, that these flies and maggots appeared out of nowhere. But when a scientist placed a screen over top of one of the rotting meats, the flies and maggots started appearing on top of that, as if they weren't spontaneously generating from the meat itself, as was theorized. And so we found out that these contaminants would have to get to the meat in order to consume it. So Louis Pasteur found that a lot of these bacterial decomposers, because your biggest decomposers is bacteria that break it down, were coming from the air. And if you cook them to a certain temperature or boil them, it will kill them, and the substance that you were trying to preserve will last a lot longer. I think beer was the very first thing he worked on this with, because people who were brewing beer kept having some of it go rotten, and it was what was in the air that he found was contaminating it, these bacteria that were landing on it and breaking it down. And he found that boiling it killed the bacteria, and the beer was able to last longer and save these beer brewers a lot of money. So science helping people get drunk since well over 100 years ago. And it's impressive, a lot of the things that we find in science. It's always blowing my mind as to how complex the symbiotic relationships are, life itself, and all of this stuff. It gets really deep, but I just wanted to clear up some of those common misconceptions that a lot of us had about evolution. And it's just because a lot of people see pictures, images, and they jump on board with a theory based on that. I was one of them who thought that those textbooks were infallible and couldn't produce false images. And that's just sadly not the case. It's one of those things that we are confronted with, and that's why it's best to do your own research and find out what evolution really is, and not what people kind of think it is, where they say, you know, we come from monkeys, and that's not what evolution is at all. It is simply change over time, and it's important to understand how that relates to the scientific world and what the truths are compared to what some of the false images and ideas are. So I wanted to pass that along before you guys moved on to see this stuff in the future. And if you ever have a question on a test about this stuff, just the way the standards are, what they want you to pick is the words that say common ancestor. If they say, what do these pictures of an embryo prove, and they show this same picture, they're wanting you to pick common ancestor. You don't have to believe that. I'm not saying that's true. That's what they want you to pick. I'm not telling you either way what to believe. I do have some evidence I've seen that sort of sways me in another direction, and one of those is something that I haven't even seen yet in textbooks, even though it is a major find, and it has to do with these dinosaur fossils that people are finding and analyzing are not really fossils but bones, and these dinosaur bones that are being broken down with these solutions that break them down are exposing soft tissue. And I will leave some links in the description for you about this stuff because it's groundbreaking, and I'm not going to say it rewrites history, and I'm just going to let you investigate it and draw your own conclusions. I've been in contact with Mark Armitage, the man who has made these discoveries, and he says that he doesn't want this to create a debate among creationists and evolutionists. He just really wants it to be information that we can look at and make our own conclusions without him drawing out animations like we've seen in the past to mislead anyone. He wants you to use the scientific method, as do I, and prove all things. I think that's the most important message in this video, is really don't believe everything you see on the internet, and sometimes even in books. If it's a drawing and someone's theory is trying to be supported, they could alter things in a way that fits their view of reality. Doesn't mean that it's true. So I just wanted to clear that up. There's a lot of misconceptions about what evolution is, and really it's just change over time, nothing to get bent out of shape over. So again, do your own research, prove all things, weigh all of the options, and think for yourselves. You guys are smart, and part of the scientific method is making an educated guess. Doesn't mean it's always going to be right. Just do your best to prove what you believe, and do so no matter what other people think. It's going to be interesting to see where some of this new evidence leads, but again, I don't think many people have seen this or are aware of it, so that's why I'm sharing it with you guys, so you can talk amongst yourselves, and we might do a discussion about that in the future because it's very groundbreaking, or could be groundbreaking. We'll leave that up to the future findings as well as the current findings. So take care. I'll see you guys soon to discuss what's coming up with our finals and what to expect. I miss you guys a lot. Hopefully I will get to see you very soon. Stay safe.